Whatever goes around comes around. Karma, yin and yang, eye for an eye. You reap what you sow. Whoever smelt it, dealt it. Some philosophies teach that as the defining principle of the entire world, spiritual realm, physical realm, everything. Some philosophies, like the Christian worldview, realize that yes, there is truth to that. You do reap what you sow. Jesus himself taught that. There is thankfully a bonus system at play. That is not the only system functioning in this world. You get what you deserve. That is called justice. That does take place. That is the rule, the defining principle of the natural world. There's thankfully a supernatural system on top of that. Thankfully, there is mercy, that you sometimes do not get what you deserve. And thankfully, there's also grace, that sometimes you get what you don't deserve. You get better than you deserve. And today we're going to talk about the patriarch Jacob, a thieving, conniving, trickster, charlatan, basically a normal human who often got what he deserved. Like what goes around comes around for him quite often throughout his life. It comes right back on him. But because of his faith, which develops over the course of the story, because of the faith of his grandfather as well, and because God was not willing to give up on him, he finally submits to God, and he ends up with much more than he ever could have deserved. And he's one of the patriarchs of the Bible. You and I deserve the wages of our sins. And the gift of God, though, is eternal life in Christ Jesus, if he is our Lord. And we are almost done with our sermon series through the book of Genesis. We went a little bit slower through Genesis 1 through 11, and now we are just flying in Genesis chapters 12 through 50. We've been covering each patriarch gets just 1 week of his own time here. And so Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they are the patriarchs of the nation of Israel, and they each get 1 week is how we're doing this. And so Jacob is the last of the official all-Israel patriarchs. He's the last man who can rightfully be considered the father of all of Israel, because he is the father of all of Israel. So he's the last of the full nation patriarchs. There are other people called patriarchs occasionally, but he's the last one of I am the patriarch of all of Israel, because his 12 boys, essentially, sort of, when you look at it in the kind of way, it gets goofy. Because all 12 of his boys are not all 12 tribes of Israel, but that's for another day. Come to midweek for that, because that gets weird. But his 12 boys essentially become the patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel, but each one is not over all of Israel, just their 12, or just their single tribe. His name also, Jacob's name, gets changed to Israel as well. And so he really he's the namesake of Israel, because he goes by Israel, and that's why the nation is called that. Now, because Jacob's name is changed to Israel, technically Jacob is mentioned about 3,000 times throughout the Bible. That means in a one-off sermon about Jacob, we are not even going to get even a small percentage of the mentions of him. We just won't. We could not cover everything about Jacob/Israel, even if we wanted to preach for days and like pull an Apostle Paul and have people falling out of windows dying. We can't do that. I doubt you want to hear me that long. We didn't plan on it. We would run out of snacks quickly. And so let's stick to the highlights is what we're going to do today. Jacob's story is unique in some sense in that there are parts of his life that are more detailed than any other character in the Bible in some ways. There's faster stuff, like 7 years will pass in the blink of an eye in Jacob's life. There's 7 years that it says Jacob feels like these were just a mere few days. And then the next 7 years, it literally says like nothing about how those 7 years went except for a few other details. But on the other hand, there is one evening of Jacob's life that gets pages of material. Just one evening that gets pages of material about. He's also kind of like the most normal guy of all the patriarchs. I mean, I'm not an Abraham. I'm just not, right? And I kind of don't want to be a Jacob, or I don't want to be an Isaac. But I could see myself doing some of the things Jacob does, right? Like if I'm honest with myself, he's kind of like an everyman patriarch because he's a trickster and he's willing to trip people up for his own benefit. And even if you are a moral enough person to not do that, you've been tempted before, right? To just let other people lose so you can win. A lot of people have that temptation. He's also probably the most stubborn man in the entire Bible, and I definitely resonate with that. He spends a whole night wrestling with an angel / God. We can talk about that later. the entire night wrestling with this being who can very clearly best him because all that being has to do is go boop, and suddenly Jacob's disabled. And Jacob refuses to let go even after that. And they wrestle the entire night long. And also, if you do the math, he's 97 that night. So that's crazy. He runs from danger and sometimes puts other people in danger to save his own skin. And yet he also desperately wants to follow the Lord. As you read through his story too, he just keeps putting himself first when he tries to do it. He's torn with indecision when there aren't good solutions. He remembers the people who hurt him in the past and holds on to those grudges probably too long. And at the end of his life before Pharaoh, and I'm sad that Vic's not here because I could totally see Vic saying this. At 130 years old, when he's standing before Pharaoh, he says, yeah, I'm 130. Few and evil have been the days of my life. Like that's just a very kind of Vic thing to say. he would be totally okay with that. But just few and evil have been the days of my life. That's how he explains how his life has been. Before the king of the known world, it's like, yeah, I'm not that old. I'm just cranky. Like that's how Jacob says it. Over the course of his life, he's very much a human with human emotions, and we see those emotions throughout the story of his life too. That obviously makes sense. He is a human, but it's just that he is one of the few characters that we get this much material about in the entire Bible. Most characters, we see just an overly simplified snapshot of their life because that's all we need to know to progress the storyline. Jacob, however, gets chapters approximately 25 through 50 of Genesis. King David is the only guy who comes close to competing with Jacob as far as how much we know about his life, besides Jesus himself. And so we just know so much about him. We get so many details and stories about him. And so I strongly recommend you read the entire Jacob story at some point. We're not going to today because it's literally half of the book of Genesis. Next week, we will still do one more sermon out of the book of Genesis because Jacob's child Joseph becomes the main character for about 10 of the last 12 or 13 chapters, depending on how you look at those. He's like a bonus patriarch because it's Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat. There's that story, and that is there. Jacob, though, Israel, is still in the background in all of those chapters, so it's still his chapters. It's still technically his storyline there. But still, we'll get a bonus story at the end of the sermon series. So today we're going to ignore the beginning and the end of Jacob's life because we have to. We're going to fly rapidly through some of the details in the middle. In fact, you can get away with covering just the middle of Jacob's life because his life is a chiasm. If you go with just chapters 25 through 35, if you remember what a chiasm is, the story of the flood is a chiasm. And yes, I get to use my favorite word, penultimate now, because the first line mirrors the ultimate line, the second line mirrors the penultimate line, the third line mirrors the anti-penultimate line, the fourth line mirrors the pre-anti-penultimate line, and it gets better than that. But it's one of those things where like everything kind of mirrors, and so this line mirrors that one, that one, that one, that one, that one. And in Jacob's life, you actually get that when you start to pay attention. It's not as easily defined as the Noah story, but it ends in the middle with the story about Jacob having kids out the wazoo. And so your communion meditation almost fits, except for the alien. And so that's the central theme of Jacob's story, is that he has lots of kids. Like that's, for some reason, the way God inspired the narrator and the author of Genesis to write out the story, is that's the central point of the first 10 chapters of Jacob's life there. And so we're going to skip straight to Genesis chapter 29. To summarize where we're at in his life, way too quickly though, Jacob was born to Isaac. He was the promised son of Abraham. Abraham was the forefather of faith in God. He was promised that God would make him into a great nation with a special location that they could bless the world. That covenant is eventually fulfilled in Jesus. Jesus saves the world. He's able to bless all the nations and reclaim them. He claims all of the nations as their rightful king. And in the meantime, though, before we get 2,000 years later, which is 2,000 years in the past for us, before Jesus says, hey, I'm the promised one of all those covenant promises, it has to start somewhere. And God starts revealing that in smaller ways. That revelation of a promise of, hey, there will be a special nation that does bless all the nations, that promise gets passed to Isaac, that gets passed to Jacob. Jacob is the one marked as the guy who will carry those promises that were made to Abraham. He's received that blessing to become a great nation. to own the promised land, to bless the entire world. But due to circumstances completely within his control, he's on the run. And he's trying to get away from his brother, actually, and he has to go stay with his uncle Laban for a while. And when he's there, he meets this woman named Rachel. And because of his love for her, he spends 20 years of his life outside of the promised land working for Laban. And it's during those 20 years that one of the promises of the covenant actually starts to unfold. Because he enters into Haran, outside of the promised land. He enters into there just himself. He is completely by himself, which is even now, we're at a worse position than Abraham was. Abraham had himself plus one child of the promise by the end of his life. Now we're back to one dude. And so it's actually, we've regressed almost in fulfilling the covenant promises. And we're outside of Haran, or we're outside the promised land in Haran. But while he's there, he leaves with enough goods and services that if you compare how much he's able to give away to his brother in the story, he has a larger economy than many nations back then, personally. He also has 12 sons, well, 11 at the time when he leaves there. And so he's got a small mini nation in the works, and he's got enough to run a nation going on around him. And so that covenant promise is starting to be real, that he is going to turn into a nation there. And so that is unfolding in the story, and that's why that's the central theme. But we'll back up just a little bit when he first enters Haran. In Genesis chapter 29, he arrives in Haran with his uncle Laban, meets the woman of his dreams, starts raising a ginormous family, and so he can fulfill God's promise to build a nation. And so here's how that comes about. Genesis chapter 29, verse 1. Then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. As he looked, he saw a well in the field, and behold, 3 flocks of sheep lying beside it. For out of that well the flocks were watered. The stone on the well's mouth was large, and when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob said to them, "My brothers, where do you come from?" They said, "We are from Haran." He said to them, "Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor?" They said, "We know him." He said to them, "Is it well with him?" They said, "It is well. And see, Rachel his daughter is coming with the sheep." He said, "Behold, it is still high day. It is not time for the livestock to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go pasture them." But they said, "We cannot until all the flocks are gathered together and the stone is rolled from the mouth of the well. Then we water the sheep." While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. Now as soon as Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob came near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud, and Jacob told Rachel that she was her father's kinsman and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him, embraced him and kissed him, and brought him to his house. Jacob told Laban all these things, and Laban said to him, "Surely you are my bone and my flesh." And he stayed with him a month. All right, so that was a long bit of verses there. We're going to have another couple long stretches there. But Laban is an old man. If you do the math with all the chronology from the rest of the Bible, I said that that Jacob is 97 when he wrestles with the angel. This is 20 years earlier. But if you do the math, it's been 97 years since Abraham's servant left with Rebekah to find a wife for Isaac. And so it's been almost 100 years since Laban has seen his family. That means Laban's getting pretty up there in years, which is crazy to think about. But it's a 500-mile journey between the two places, so it makes sense. They're just super thrilled to hear, "My family I sent off 500 miles away isn't dead." And so there's a nice little family reunion going on, because 500 miles is a long distance nowadays. Think of what it was before the invention of anything to travel or communicate long distances. So they're excited about seeing each other there. It's the emotional reunion and everybody kissing each other there. The kissing when he kisses Rachel, that's not romantic. It's just excitement over seeing family. But there is, though, as Jacob arrives, there's a group of shepherds waiting to have all of the shepherds gathered so they can move the stone covering the well. It seems like it takes the whole community of shepherds to move the stone covering the well. They're waiting for everyone to show up so that they can. They would have used very heavy coverings because they wouldn't have built like a wall up around the well. It would have just been surface level. They don't want things to fall in. And also it's to kind of keep it safe and it's community protected. And when Jacob sees Rachel, suddenly he has the strength of 10 men and rolls away the stone himself, waters just her flocks, and apparently puts the stone back. And like, what? But he just becomes Superman when Rachel walks in the room, is what goes on there. But then they go get Laban, and Laban says, hey, you are my bone and my flesh. They see a family resemblance. That's also foreshadowing. Because while we've skipped a bunch of stories about Jacob, I've already told you about Jacob, he's a jerk. Like, if you just know his story, he's a really terrible son and brother. Like, he just is. We skipped the stories about his life, that he's a trickster. His name is actually used as a pun for the word supplanter, like one who grabs someone else's heel while they're walking. So he's the tripping guy. Like, that's his nickname. Now, Jacob can mean something else, but if you say his name just right, slightly differently, it means the one who trips everyone else up. And the Bible kind of tells us that they did that. And so they just knew him as the guy who trips everyone else. He tricked his own father when his father's eyesight was failing. Laban, we will find out, is just as much of a tripper as a supplanter. In him, Jacob will meet his match, and what goes around comes around. And Laban, his uncle, will do everything but almost worse and just as mean. So like, in the twist of cruel irony, just like Jacob abused his father's blindness, Laban will abuse Jacob's blindness. He's not physically blind, but he's blind with love. And so we keep reading. Next verse, verse 15. Then Laban said to Jacob, because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what should your wages be? Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, and by the way, we have absolutely no idea what that's supposed to mean. No one does. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than I should give her to any other man. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife that I may go into her, for my time is completed. So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. Laban gave his female servant Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her servant. And in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, what is this you've done to me? Did I not serve with you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me? Laban said, it is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also in return for serving me another 7 years. Jacob did so and completed her week. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his female servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel to be her servant. So Jacob went into Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served Laban another 7 years. Now, before we go any further in this story, we just need to cover something. The Bible does not endorse polygamy. That happens in the story. That doesn't mean the Bible is endorsing it. In Genesis chapter 1, reaffirmed by Jesus in the Gospels, that in the beginning God made them male and female and designed it so that one man and one woman would join together in a lasting marriage that no one should ever break apart. That is reaffirmed multiple times throughout the Bible as that is what God commands is necessary for marriage. Anything else besides one man and one woman for life is outside of God's commands. It is a sin, and it is wrong. Jacob's polygamy is described as historically correct. It is not prescribed as morally correct. So there's a big difference. Describing what happened as historical is not the same as prescribing what happened as you should go ahead and do it too. It's a huge difference between those two things. And so as we read the story, including the ones we won't read today, but also in the ones we will read today too, you will see the drama and the heartache and the problems that the polygamy caused. It is not cast in a positive light. Now, someone might argue, see, but it's okay because that's how he was able to be turned into a nation. They were able to have so many kids left and right because he needed the 4 wives that he ends up with. That's just how it had to happen. You know what? God is perfectly capable of the miraculous with or without human sin. So, no, he didn't need to have 4 wives to have 12 children for the nation of Israel. God is perfectly capable of giving as many kids as he should have had without him sinning. and ruining his wives' lives is really what he did in there. The good news is that God is willing to work with the horrible material that we give him. So he works with fallen sinners, and even the patriarchs are fallen sinners. Now, with that said, so the Bible does not say polygamy is good. It doesn't. With that said, though, we can look at what's happening in the stories. The last time we read about eyes, I said we don't know what it means that Leah's eyes were weak. We really don't know what it means. With the next line, though, and most translations cut out one of the beautiful. It says that Rachel is beautiful twice. It says she is beautiful form and beautiful appearance. And so I don't know if that means like she's got a beautiful heart and a smoking hot body, like, because it says she's beautiful twice there. But also, we have no idea what beauty standards were back then because beauty standards change culture to culture. But we do know that Leah's eyes are weak. The last time we read about eyes, though, were when we read about Jacob's dad's eyes failing. And so there's a little bit of maybe karma is coming back around here, maybe kind of thing. That's foreshadowing there. Laban, realizing that he's in the position of power in the bargaining, he holds all the chips. He says that if Jacob wants Rachel's hand in marriage, he has to work 7 years for her. And that sounds crazy to us. I mean, it just does. It actually isn't that crazy of a bride price. It is a little bit ridiculous. The bride price was a large financial gift meant to be held in reserve by the father-in-law, by the father of the bride. He's supposed to keep that in reserve in case anything ever happens to the marriage. That was how it worked, is you would approach your potential father-in-law and say, I am willing to give you this much of my property to promise that she will always be taken care of. So if I disappear, if I die, if I divorce her, she has this reserve money set aside that you were supposed to manage because you love her as her father, that if something happens to me, she's not used goods and the culture is going to hate her. There's a nest egg set aside to make sure that she's safe. Like, that's the idea of the bride price. Jacob doesn't have anything to give. He ran away from home, and so he's got nothing. We know that in the documents of Nuzi, which is these ancient Mesopotamian documents from approximately the same time range and the same-ish culture, a standard bride price going rate was like between 30 to 40 shekels, and a shepherd's annual wages were about 10 shekels a year back in that time period. And so 3-4 years of service was totally fair, but Jacob doesn't have anything in his favor, so 7 years is what Laban charges him. And so it's not that outrageous, but it's reasonable, and so that kind of makes sense. Deuteronomy 22 actually gives a maximum of 50 shekels for a bride price. And so that's an interesting little note that Rachel was apparently better than the best the Torah allows. And Jacob was just okay with it. But Jacob agrees to the amount, but something blinds him during the wedding feast. We don't know what was going on there. It's easy to assume something like alcohol was involved and veils were involved. And so there's just things going on there. Again, it's descriptive, not prescriptive. This is just what happened. And he wakes up the next morning and realizes that I didn't marry the right woman. That would be a weird experience for both of them. Think about Leah's emotions in this. Like, that just not good all around here. Laban claims it's local tradition to marry off the older daughter first, but in 7 years, he didn't have the time to tell Jacob. Thanks, Laban, right? So Jacob agrees to work another 7 years for Rachel's hand in marriage. It seems like he gets her immediately, though, but he's on the hook now for 7 more years working for Laban, and that's when the drama starts. Like, yes, it's drama before that, but there's more drama after that. We'll read a few more verses. We're not going to read all the drama, but here's verses 31, next verse, and we'll stop partway through the story in verse 3, the next chapter. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, because the Lord has looked upon my affliction, for now my husband will love me. She conceived again and bore a son, and said, because the Lord has heard that I am hated, he has given me this son also, and she called his name Simeon. Again she conceived and bore a son, and said, now this time my husband will be attached to me, because I've borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name was called Levi. And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, this time I will praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah. Then she ceased bearing. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister. She said to Jacob, give me children or I'll die. Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, am I in the place of God, who's withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Then she said, here's my servant Bilhah. Go unto her, that she may give birth on my behalf. that even I may have children through her. And the story gets worse and weirder after that, and they start swapping servants to vicariously have extra children through each other, and they bargain, and like it's weird. So the polygamy gets worse. Jacob goes from 2 wives to 4 wives. The 2 original wives are never willing to call the servants wives. They just keep referring to them as servants. The narrator of the book of Genesis calls them wives often, not always though. And so it's just this weird, bad situation all the way around. You can feel the drama increasing too. It makes sense the drama would increase. In a patriarchal society like that, a woman's worth was defined by how many male heirs she could produce. And if you only know the story of the patriarchs and nothing else, if you just read these stories, that is not how God values women, but it is how the culture back then valued women. And so you can see how it would make Rachel not feel the greatest if you just know how bad the culture was then. And eventually, Rachel starts a shouting match with her husband, screaming, "Give me children or I shall die," which this story is filled with irony because she dies in childbirth later. And so she, in a weird twist of fate, gets both of those wishes at once there. The drama continues throughout all of Israel's history to the point that the nation splits apart and does not stay a collected group of 12 tribes. They've split apart. To this day, all 12 tribes can't be traced. Like it just became a dramatic, giant mess. Through Leah, Jacob has 4 sons. Through Bilhah, he has 2 sons. Through Zilpah, he has 2 more sons. Leah has 2 more sons. Then Rachel has 1 son when they're living in Haran, and later on, after they get back to the Promised Land, she has another son and dies in childbirth. Then, oddly enough, as I said, these verses where he's having kids left and right, those are the focal point of the chiastic structure of the story. The narrator has set this up literarily to say this is the main point of Jacob's story, is having babies. Like that's what goes on here. Again, though, these stories are not prescriptive. They are descriptive how God is willing to work with fallen people to fulfill his covenant promises. Even though it could and probably should have been done in a less horrible to your own family kind of way, God uses whatever he has to work with in order to achieve his purposes. And we should be thankful that that is how God works, because we typically give God pretty terrible material to work with. Like I love the saying, I've said it before recently even, but it's when God made plans for you, he already factored in your stupidity. And he knew that that's what Jacob would do, and he was willing to work with that because he's willing to work with sinful, broken people. If he wasn't willing to work with sinful, broken people, we would have all died off and gone to hell a long time ago. Like that's just the truth of the matter. But so thankfully, God is willing to work with messes and cleans them up and redeems them because God's in the business of redemption. He's willing to work with us. And in fact, sometimes the more we fight and resist God, all it means is that's the more God proves his love for us and is willing to put up with us. And we see that illustrated perfectly well. We're going to fast forward a few years in Jacob's life to the night, that's a very famous story from Jacob's life, where he starts wrestling this random mysterious stranger, and we are not going to cover everything in that passage. This is a great plug for midweek because we are going to cover Jacob's life in the adult midweek lesson on Wednesday night if you want to come and talk more about whatever's going on there. But here's Genesis chapter 32, verse 22 through 32. This is the end of that really long evening that we get tons of description about in Jacob's life. The same night, Jacob arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream and everything else that he had, and Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." And he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you've striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." Peniel means face of God. The sun rose up upon him as he passed Penuel, limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. Again, there's a lot of weirdness going on there that we're just not going to mention. We just don't. But after one long day and evening, after a particularly trying day of Jacob being his stubborn self, protecting numero uno in his life. He is planning on how to divide and carve up his family so that at least only a few of them will die and I'll get to escape. Like, he spends the day planning that, how many people in his family can die so that he survives. That's what he's planning throughout that whole day there. A stranger shows up at the end of that stressful day and starts wrestling with him. That stranger, this translation says man. It's actually even more generic of a pronoun than that. It is like the word other in one another. So this other walks up and starts wrestling with Jacob for some reason. And it's funny because it's Yabok Haboks at the Yabok River. And so that would just been so much fun to say in the original Hebrew. But he won't let Jacob go. He just wrestles with Jacob all night long. And Jacob won't let go either, even though it's very obvious who's the superior fighter. But he just won't tap out. Like, I wonder how many times he choked out and woke up and said, "I'm still not saying uncle." Like, he wrestles the whole night long. Finally, they come to an impasse when this mysterious stranger is willing to change his name. And you think he's like, "What's your name?" It's not exactly that. It's slightly different wording to, "What does your name mean?" And when he says it's Jacob, he goes, "No, your name's not Jacob. It's Israel, because you wrestle with everyone you can." And that's what this weird stranger who comes out of nowhere says to him. Israel means God wrestler. And Jacob realizes that he might have just seen God's face and not died. And so then they give up the fight. He is changed in that story from that moment on because he finally saw God face to face, or something like God face to face, right? He realized God was willing to dramatically illustrate the problem in his life up to that point. It's that Jacob wasn't ever willing to submit to anyone or anything, not even those to whom he should submit, not even to those to whom he should love and sacrifice for. He was not willing to give up anything of himself. He was always thinking of himself first. And God showed him with just one single touch that God is in charge, and he has been in charge this entire time. But he's willing to put up with wrestling Jacob as long as it takes for Jacob to see the truth. He's been going about his life the wrong way the whole life. And it's not about whether or not you can get the upper hand on everyone you interact with. It is about realizing God has always had the upper hand, and he will always have it. Quit fighting him. And God shows up and dramatically illustrates that with an actual fighting match, which is crazy to think about. But apparently that's what it took for Jacob, is an actual wrestling match there to say, quit wrestling everyone. You don't need to be in charge of everyone you ever meet. You don't need the upper hand because God's had it the whole time. So stop fighting so hard, is what God physically tells him. I hope we can learn the same lesson without a wrestling match with God. Although, like, to be honest, I don't think we can most of the time. Maybe not a physical wrestling match, but we often are always just, trying to get the one up on everyone else. Always, even God. And even when our stubbornness results in God reaching down from heaven going, zap! And suddenly I'm like, oh, okay, I should have learned a lesson, but we still keep going. Like, that happens quite often in our lives, doesn't it? We often still are just stubborn and don't give up. But even though we fight with God, he holds on for the ride as long as it takes, as long as there's a chance of us realizing he is the one in charge. So that, the question is not, do I live a good enough life or do I get enough good things done to have God on my side? Because you don't. Jacob, in the cosmic scales of justice, Jacob would lose. So would we. Jacob didn't get enough good things done, even with this giant nation he's building. I don't. No one does. The real question is not, do I get enough good things done to make God submit to me? It is, am I thankful that God is willing to work with me, even my imperfections, so much that I do my best to stop giving him imperfections to work with? Jacob was just a normal guy who wasn't willing to let God go, even if he was often wrong and doing it wrong. Thankfully, God is willing to wrestle with us and not let us go either. God fulfilled his promises even with a not-so-ideal guy in a very not-so-ideal marriage, and the marriage grew into a nation of 12 tribes. God has even better promises that span on into eternity. And if God could turn a guy whose literal name is the one who trips people up into the father of a nation, what could God do in your life if you stop trying to make others submit to you all the time and refuse to give up to God? And what could God do in your life when you stop working against him and just keep trying to wrestle him? God's not going to say uncle. Doesn't have to. He's God. Stop fighting others, stop fighting God, and he will give you more than you deserve. He will not just give you mercy, he'll give you grace. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we ask that we can stop trying to wrestle you. Even those of us who have turned our lives over to you, there are so many times that we discover something new about ourselves when, no, we didn't turn that part over to you, and we're trying to wrestle hold of that back and keep it from you.